They left the paralyzed Apache woman on a wooden handcart, but the cowboy refused to walk away. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The sun was sinking behind the low ridges when Harlan Creed turned his horse toward the long stretch of land leading back to his cabin. He had been on the trail since early morning, riding to Willow Bend for flour, lamp oil, and new stitching for his saddle. Supply trips were rare for him. He preferred staying on his land where days moved quietly and no one demanded anything of him. Still, winter was coming, and he needed enough stored goods to last the colder months. At 35, Harlan carried the kind of weight that didn't show in scars or limpness, but in the way he rarely hurried and watched every movement around him with steady caution. His brother had died 5 years earlier in a dispute near the border, and since then Harlan had lived alone, working a small stretch of prairie and keeping to himself. It wasn't the life he expected, but it was the one he could manage. The silence suited him. The distance from people felt easier than explaining the loss he still carried. As he rode that evening, his shoulders ached from the long trip and his stomach pulled tight from the cold meal he'd eaten hours earlier. The land around him was so familiar he didn't need to think about the trail. Dry brush spreading out to the sides, low dirt mounds shaped by wind, and a thin line of cracked earth showing where water once ran through the creek bed. Then something changed in the landscape. A shape sat near the edge of the wash, out of place against the fading light. At first he thought it might be a tipped barrel or someone's discarded gear, but as he drew closer he recognized the outline of a handcart, small, homemade, battered from long use. One wheel leaned inward at an unnatural angle, and the front rope lay snapped on the ground. A blanket stretched across the top, raised slightly in the middle. Harlan slowed his horse instinctively. The sudden tension in his chest tightened his throat as he scanned the ground for tracks or signs of ambush. The prairie was quiet, too quiet for a car to be sitting here without someone nearby. He eased off his saddle, boots pressing into the dry soil with a firmness that steadied him. He approached the cart slowly, one hand resting on the gun belt he rarely used anymore. His pulse didn't spike, but it thickened the way it always did when he sensed something wrong. He reached for the blanket and lifted it just enough to see who was underneath. A young Apache woman lay curled slightly to one side. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale under the dirt, and her eyes barely open. She looked no older than 24. Her black hair hung in tangled strands across her cheek, and her dress, deerskin with simple beadwork, was torn along the edges. Her legs were straight and stiff beneath her, and when she tried to shift them, nothing moved. Her eyes focused on him slowly, not with recognition, but with the instinctive fear of someone who had been mistreated before help ever came. She didn't speak. Her lips trembled from dryness, and her hands, though weak, tightened on the corner of the blanket as if bracing for pain. Harlan felt a sudden heaviness settle in his chest. Someone had left her here, not by accident. The broken wheel and the drag marks behind the cart told him she'd been pulled until whoever moved her gave up. He knew enough about tribal disputes to understand that an injured member could become a burden during migration. It didn't make it right. It only explained why no one had come back. He knelt beside the cart, his knees brushing dusty earth. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. Her throat worked before she answered, voice thin and strained. "Taya." He nodded once, taking in the tightness in her jaw, the tremor in her fingers, the fear in her eyes. She couldn't walk. She couldn't defend herself. If he left her, the cold night would take her. A thought tugged at him, one he didn't fully want. Bringing her home meant responsibility, something he'd avoided since his brother died. But the idea of riding away with her still breathing in this state pressed heavily against his conscience. He couldn't do it. He hadn't saved his brother, but he could save her. Maybe that was reason enough. "I'm going to lift you," he said. "Tell me if something hurts too much." She gave a faint nod, though her expression showed uncertainty. He slid one arm under her back and the other beneath her knees. Her body tensed immediately, a stiff, uncontrolled reaction, and a broken sound left her lips as he raised her slowly. Her legs hung loose, unresponsive, and he kept one hand firmly behind her shoulders to prevent her from falling forward. She gripped his coat, not in trust, but because she needed something to hold on to. Carrying her to the horse took time. Her breathing hitched each time he shifted her weight, and he moved with steady focus to keep her from pain. Once he had her seated sideways in front of him, he mounted behind her, gathering the reins in one hand while supporting her back with the other. She leaned into him because her strength had run out. He felt the faint tremble of her breathing through his coat, and that quiet fragility sharpened his resolve. Leaving her wasn't an option. The ride to his cabin took longer than usual. The prairie darkened quickly, and he kept the horse at a careful pace so the motion wouldn't jolt her. The temperature dropped, and he felt her shiver once before growing still again. And each time she blinked, he saw exhaustion pull her closer to unconsciousness. "You stay awake if you can," he said, voice low. She nodded faintly, but it was clear she was fighting the pull of sleep. When the cabin finally came into view, a small, worn building with a thin column of smoke still drifting from a chimney, Harlan felt tension ease from his shoulders. This was the only place he trusted, a place built from years of habit and quiet, a place where he didn't owe anyone anything. He dismounted, lifted her again, and carried her inside. The warmth from the stove wasn't strong, but it was better than the cold outside. He laid her on his cot, his only bed, and arranged a thicker blanket over her legs. She watched him through half-closed eyes, fear still lingering though her body sagged with relief. "You're safe here," he said. It wasn't a promise of anything more than the night, but it was solid. She believed it enough to let her eyes close. Harlan stepped back only when her breathing settled into a steadier rhythm. He added wood to the fire, checked the water bucket, and sat near the stove where he could see her clearly. He wasn't used to sharing the cabin with anyone, but he didn't question the choice he'd made. He looked at her again, taking in the way she lay, fragile, exhausted, and still fighting for each breath, and he made a quiet decision without speaking it aloud. Tomorrow he would find out what she needed. Tonight, he would keep her alive. The cabin settled into silence, and for the first time in years, Harlan didn't mind the company. The faint glow from the stove faded into the early light seeping through the window when Taya stirred. Her breath came in shallow pulls, and her eyes opened as if she wasn't entirely sure where she was. For a moment, she lay completely still, listening to the sound of wood shifting inside the iron stove and the quiet scrape of a chair moving across the floor. She turned her head slightly, careful not to strain her back, and saw Harlan Creed sitting beside the table with his coat slung over the chair behind him, his posture tight from a night without rest. He watched her wake with the same steady expression he wore on the trail, calm but alert, as if he expected pain or fear to strike at any moment. She blinked a few times before her voice came out as a thin whisper. "Is this your home?" "It is," he answered, his tone controlled and flat, but not unfriendly. "You're safe here." She let out a slow breath, studying the room properly for the first time. The cabin was small, built with rough logs and corners worn smooth from years of use. A single shelf near the stove held tins of dried food, a sack of flour, a coil of rope, and a tin lantern. A few tools, mostly knives, saws, and a hammer, hung neatly on pegs beside the door. Taya noticed that everything was placed carefully, not decorative but practical, the kind of order a man kept when he lived alone for a long time. She tried shifting her legs under the blanket, hoping maybe the night had changed something. Nothing moved. The sharp disappointment that washed across her face was hard to hide, and her hands gripped the fabric tightly. Harlan caught the motion immediately and set aside the piece of leather he'd been working on. "You won't hurt anything trying," he said. "But don't force them." His voice held a quiet certainty that steadied her more than the words themselves. He rose and crossed the cabin, pouring warm water from a pot into a wooden cup. When he brought it back to her, she lifted her hand with effort. Her arm trembled halfway, and he stepped in only enough to help guide the cup without taking it from her completely. Her lips brushed the rim, the steam warming her mouth. "How long was I asleep?" "Most of the night," he replied. "You were worn down to nothing." She nodded, swallowing hard as she processed the memory of being dragged across dry soil, the jolt of the broken wheel, the faces of the ones who left her behind. The guilt of being abandoned pressed into her chest until her breathing hitched. Why did they leave me? Her question hung in the air, raw and unsteady. Harlan didn't answer right away. He leaned against the side of the table, his jaw tightening as he weighed his words. Because people make hard choices when they're scared, he finally said. Not always the right ones. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't comfort. It was direct truth, and Taya recognized it instantly. I slowed them, she whispered. They said I would get better. Then I didn't. Harlan exhaled slowly through his nose, the sound barely audible. Doesn't matter now. You're not out there anymore. She watched him closely, trying to understand why he had brought her here and what he expected from her. He noticed the hesitation in her eyes and addressed it before she voiced it. You're not payment for anything, he said firmly. You don't owe me. Her throat tightened with relief she didn't want to show too openly. She shifted her hand across the blanket to test her strength. She wanted to sit upright, but wasn't sure how to do it without hurting herself. Harlan stepped forward and slid a folded blanket behind her back, lifting her with steady movements that didn't jolt her spine. You tell me if something feels wrong. She nodded, and slowly he raised her to a seated position. Pain tugged upward from her lower back, but it wasn't sharp, only heavy. She breathed through it, using the wall for support. When she was steady, he stepped back to give her space. Better. Yes, she said, though the weakness in her voice betrayed her struggle. Harlan crossed to a wooden crate in the corner, bringing it beside the cot. He covered it with a spare cloth so her hands would have something firm to grip. She stared at the crate, confused for a moment, until she understood he had built something for her to hold on to. You'll need your arms for now, he said. They'll do most of the work. He wasn't a man who wasted effort explaining things twice, but his tone lacked impatience. It sounded more like someone who had spent years solving problems alone and now had to include someone else in the process. Taya let her fingers press against the crate. She felt its solidity, the rough texture of the wood. It grounded her. She looked at him again. Will I walk? You got hurt, but you're not broken, he replied. I've seen worse come back. He didn't promise. He didn't soften his voice, but the steadiness of it sank into her like something she could hold on to. Her eyes traveled across the room, noticing an empty hook on the far wall, a clean plate on the table beside Harlan, and a bedroll on the floor near the stove. That where you slept? He glanced at the bedroll. Didn't want to bump you or wake you. The truth of it hit her quietly. He had stayed close enough to listen to her breathing, but far enough to give her space. Her stomach tightened softly. You didn't have to do that. Didn't bother me, he said, and the simplicity of the answer carried more emotion than he intended. A soft wind pushed against the cabin wall outside. The sound made her tense for a moment before her shoulders eased again. She watched him move to the stove and add another log. He wasn't a man who moved fast, but every motion had purpose, turning the log so the flame caught evenly, adjusting the stove door so the draft pulled correctly. She studied him with the growing realization that he lived this way every day, quiet, organized, steady, alone. And now she was in the middle of it. Why do you live out here? She asked. He didn't look at her right away. Because it's easier than being around people who want more than I can give. She took in that answer slowly. And why did you stop when you saw me? This time he met her gaze directly. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened briefly. Because leaving you wasn't an option. The honesty of that shook her more than the cold wind ever had. He didn't push her to respond, only stepped back to check the shelves, gathering dried meat and a bit of grain to cook something light for her. She watched him with steady eyes now, the fear not gone, but changed. She wasn't sure how long she'd stay here. She wasn't sure how her body would recover. But she understood one thing clearly. This man didn't rescue her out of pity. He did it because something in him refused to walk away from someone who needed help. As the pot on the stove began to heat, she rested against the blanket he had propped behind her, whispering quietly to herself as exhaustion pulled at her again. For the first time since she was abandoned, she felt the faint outline of a future she hadn't dared imagine the night before. And Harlan, sitting at the table with his hands clasped loosely and his eyes scanning her condition without staring, already knew his life had changed the moment he lifted her from that handcart. The morning settled fully by the time Taya finished the small bowl of warm grain Harlan had prepared for her, and the light coming through the window grew brighter, revealing dust lines across the floorboards and the rough texture of the log walls. She shifted her weight slightly and felt a faint jolt run through her lower back. Not a movement, but a reminder of the injury that had left her on the handcart. Harlan noticed the tension in her face and stood from the table, moving to adjust the blanket behind her so the pressure didn't dig into her spine. "You're holding yourself better than last night," he said as he loosened the fabric to ease her posture. She nodded and let her hands rest on the crate he had set beside her. "I'm trying to understand what happened to me." The admission came out quieter than she intended, and he paused, waiting for her to continue. She drew a long breath before explaining the part she hadn't shared. How the dispute within her group had begun with accusations, how she stepped in to defend a younger girl, how she was shoved hard enough to land on sharp stone that bruised her back and took the strength from her legs. Harlan listened without interrupting, his expression changing only in small ways. The slight furrow of his brow when she described the injury, the way his jaw set when she said she was told to stop slowing everyone down. He didn't give an opinion, but Taya saw how he processed the story. Quietly, carefully, with a seriousness she didn't expect from someone who barely knew her. "What about you?" she asked suddenly. "Why live out here alone? What were you doing before you found me?" He hadn't expected the question. His shoulders stiffened as if he'd been pushed into a memory he rarely touched. But she kept watching him with steady eyes that didn't pry, only invited truth. "I work for a rancher near Quartz Hill," he said slowly. "Stayed there 2 years, long enough to save enough money to settle on my own land." "Why did you leave?" He ran a hand across the table's surface, fingers brushing the worn scratches left by years of use. "People argued too much. Wanted things done faster. Wanted me to take sides. I didn't want any of that." She studied him a moment longer. "And your family? Are they close?" He exhaled, a controlled release of breath, and she sensed she had touched something deeper. "My brother and I came out here together," he said. "He didn't make it past the second year." Taya lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." Harlan didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice had a worn steadiness. "I built this place after that. Kept to myself. Kept working. It was enough." Her eyes moved across the cabin again, noticing details with new understanding now that she knew he'd lived through loss. The handmade shelves, the repaired section of wall near the stove, the careful arrangement of tools that showed years of habit. "You weren't expecting anyone to show up here," she said. "No," he admitted, "but I'm not sending you back out." The firmness of that statement settled between them, grounding her in a way she didn't realize she needed. A sudden question formed in her mind, one she knew listeners would ask too. "How far is your land from any danger? From the people who left me?" Harlan walked to the window and scanned the open prairie, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully as he considered the distances he'd learned so well. "We're several hours away from most travel routes," he said. "Your group was heading south when I saw tracks yesterday. They're not coming this way." She relaxed slightly, but kept watching him, wanting clarity. "If they did," he looked at her directly, "they wouldn't get past the yard without me knowing." The quiet confidence in his voice eased something inside her, though she didn't show it openly. "Is anyone else nearby?" she asked. "Any neighbors?" "Closest cabin is 6 miles east," he answered. "Old trapper. Keeps to himself. Won't bother you." She nodded, absorbing the information. The uncertainty she carried from the moment she was abandoned had turned into a cautious sense of orientation. She now knew where she was, who she was with, and what kind of land surrounded them. Harlan stepped closer to her again. "We'll start working on your strength today." Taya blinked. "You think I can already?" "You can't stay still all day," he said. "Your body needs the effort. I'll help you without hurting you." He slid the crate a little nearer to her, then placed both of her hands firmly on its surface. "Try lifting your upper body again. Small push. Nothing more." She pressed down with both palms. Her arms shook immediately, and her breath caught as her muscles strained. The movement was tiny, but it was real. "That's enough," he said calmly, guiding her back. "You did it." The slight tremble in her fingers wasn't fear. It was the awakening of effort she hadn't felt since the injury. She stared at her hands for a moment, stunned by how much something so small could matter. Harlan stepped away only when she regained control of her breathing. "You'll get stronger. Not fast, but steady." A faint warmth rose in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something built from possibility. She looked at him with a seriousness that held gratitude. "You don't know me. You didn't have to take all this on." He shrugged lightly. "Didn't want to find you dead on a dirt road. And I'm not the kind of man who leaves someone behind." Before she could respond, a sudden thud sounded against the cabin wall outside. Taya jolted in fear, gripping the blanket tightly. Harlan's posture changed instantly. Straight-backed, alert, hand resting near the handle of the shotgun he kept mounted by the door. "It's just the wind hitting loose siding," he said after a moment, tension easing from his stance. Taya's breathing slowed. "How do you know?" "Wind comes from the west this time of year," he replied. "Always knocks that board." She swallowed hard, calming as she realized how familiar he was with every sound around this place. Harlan crossed the room and checked the stove, then glanced back at her. "Nothing's going to happen to you here. I know the difference between wind and trouble." For the first time, she believed him without reservation. The room fell into a steady quiet, not uncomfortable, but purposeful. Taya studied the cabin again, now aware of how much she didn't know about surviving in a place like this, and how much she already depended on him. Her voice softened. "What do you want me to do next?" "Rest for now," he said. "We'll do more when you've got strength for it." She leaned back against the blanket support, closing her eyes briefly. She didn't feel helpless now. She felt anchored, and Harlan, standing near the table with his arms folded, realized he had already shifted his life to include her without questioning the decision. The day was only beginning, but the shape of what they were becoming, two people forced together by circumstance yet bound by growing trust, was already settling into place with each quiet breath they shared inside the small log cabin. The sun rose higher as the morning settled, and a faint warmth crept across the rough cabin floor. Taya rested against the blanket support Harlan had arranged, her body still tired from the effort she had made, but her eyes followed him steadily as he moved around the room, gathering tools, checking supplies, and adding more wood to the fire. She watched with a growing awareness that everything he did was precise, done out of habit formed by years of living alone. She shifted her hands slightly on the crate, wanting to try lifting herself again, but unsure if she should ask. Before she could speak, Harlan walked toward her carrying a small cloth bag she hadn't noticed before. He sat on the table, opening it carefully so she could see. "I brought these back from town," he said. "Didn't know I'd need them this way." Inside the bag were two wrap bundles. He unfolded one, revealing herbs she recognized, dried leaves used to reduce swelling and ease pain. The second contained a small jar of thick salve with a faint medicinal scent. Taya stared at them with surprise. "You know how to use these?" He nodded, but his expression held a quiet reluctance. "Used them when my brother got hurt once. Helped more than anything else we had." Listeners might have wondered earlier how Harlan planned to treat someone who couldn't move her legs, or why he seemed so calm while taking care of her. Now the truth showed in the way he handled the herbs. Careful, deliberate, remembering instructions given years ago by someone who had helped him during his brother's final winter. Taya watched him crush a small portion of the leaves between his fingers before dropping them into a cup of warm water he'd just heated. "This won't fix everything," he said, "but it'll help with the pain and the swelling around your spine." She blinked, touched by the practicality of his approach. "Thank you." Harlan handed her the cup and waited while she drank. The bitter taste made her wince, but she didn't complain. When she finished, he took the cloth bag and placed it on a shelf near the stove, arranging the remaining herbs neatly. "You hungry?" he asked. "Not much," she admitted, "but I can eat." He nodded and began preparing something simple. Small pieces of dried meat boiled with a handful of grain and water. She watched his hands move with controlled strength, chopping, stirring, checking the fire. every action quiet but purposeful. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "Since your brother passed?" "No," he said as he stirred the pot. "I tried staying near the old ranch for a while. Didn't work. Too many reminders. So I bought this bit of land and built the cabin. Took me 3 months." She studied the walls again. Each log fitted tightly, the corner joints solid, the roof patched in places but holding strong. "You built all of it alone?" "Didn't want anyone near me back then," he said plainly. Didn't talk much. Still don't. Guess I didn't need to. She considered that quietly. "And now?" He didn't answer immediately. His expression tightened just enough to reveal a shift he was trying not to show. "Now's different," he finally said. "Someone else is here." The words struck her with unexpected warmth. She lowered her gaze to hide it. A new question formed in her mind, one that had lingered since the moment she woke that morning. "How far are we from the nearest river?" "From fresh water?" Harlan nodded, recognizing the importance of the question. "There's a spring 2 miles north. Flows year-round. I get water there when the well gets low. You'll see it when you're strong enough to move around. And there's no danger nearby?" "Not unless someone wanders far off the main trail," he said. "This stretch of land's forgotten by most folks." She breathed out in relief. The uncertainty she carried since being abandoned shrank slightly. When the food was ready, Harlan brought the bowl to her and set on the crate. "I can feed myself," she said, hesitant but determined. "Try," he encouraged. "I'll stop you if you're about to spill half of it." She gave a faint, tired smile and lifted the spoon. Her arm trembled, but she steadied herself, managing to bring the first spoonful to her mouth without help. She ate slowly, carefully, and Harlan stood nearby, without hovering, ready if she faltered, but giving her room to manage on her own. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and rested her hands on her lap, exhausted but proud of the effort. "What now?" she asked. He pulled the stool closer to her cot. "Now we see what else your body can do." Her heartbeat quickened. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what she might find when she tried to move parts of herself that had refused to respond. Harlan crouched beside her and spoke in a tone that steadied her nerves. "Don't force anything. I just want to see if you can feel touch along your legs, even if you can't move them yet." She nodded, bracing herself mentally. He reached toward her shin and waited until she looked him in the eyes to confirm she was ready. Then he pressed his fingertips lightly against her skin. "I feel pressure," she said quietly, "but not much." He moved a little higher and repeated the motion. "There," she said with more certainty. "Good," he replied. "Nerves aren't gone. Just slow." He slid his hand upward again, stopping when she winced. "Pain. Not pain. A sharp pull. Like something waking up." He nodded, reassured. "That's a sign we can work with." She exhaled shakily, surprised by the mix of relief and fear swirling inside her. "Would you have helped me?" she asked softly. "If you'd known how much trouble this could be?" Harlan leaned back on his heels and looked at her with a steadiness that held no hesitation. "Yes." The simplicity of it left her silent. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the small window again, but this time she didn't flinch. She knew now that Harlan understood every sound that touched these walls. "You need rest," he said as he stood. "We'll try again later." She watched him move across the room, and for the first time since her injury, she felt her fear shifting into something steadier, something like belonging. As she settled back against the blankets, she realized that each hour in this cabin brought something new. Safety she never expected, progress she hadn't dared to hope for, and a man whose quiet presence held together more than just the four walls around them. The late morning light had settled fully across the yard by the time Taya woke from the brief rest Harlan told her to take. Her body felt warm from the stove's steady heat, and she blinked slowly, trying to gauge how much time had passed. Her mind, still clouded with fatigue, cleared quickly as she noticed Harlan standing by the door, checking the latch with careful concentration. She watched the tension in his shoulders ease only after he tested the hinge twice. "You checking for someone?" she asked quietly. He looked over his shoulder, checking to make sure the wind didn't pull it loose again. "Nothing else." The explanation brought up a question listeners might have wondered earlier, whether there was any real danger of the people who abandoned her returning, or whether outsiders pass through this area. Before she could voice it, Harlan continued. This land's off most routes. Folks don't wander here without a reason. I checked the latch because it's an old cabin, not because anyone's coming. The reassurance settled her nerves. She remembered the thud from earlier and how quickly fear had risen. Now she understood that Harlan studied his surroundings with the caution of someone who survived harsh places, not with the fear of expecting trouble. He moved from the door and crossed the cabin, stopping near her cot. You ready to try more? She nodded, though not tightened in her stomach. What do you want me to do? Harlan pulled the crate slightly closer, then placed a folded cloth beneath her left thigh to prevent strain. We'll start by seeing if you can lift your leg, even a little with your hands guiding it. Doesn't matter how small. She swallowed hard, preparing herself. The idea of movement felt hopeful and terrifying at once. She placed both hands beneath her left knee, gripping gently. Harlan stayed close, watching her face for signs of pain. She took a steady breath and lifted. Her arms did most of the work, but just as she raised her knee 2 fingers width, she felt something unexpected. A faint twitch ran down her thigh, small but unmistakable. Her eyes widened. I felt that. Harlan leaned in slightly. Where? Here, she said, touching the exact spot above her knee. It moved. Not much, but it moved. His expression changed, not dramatically, but with a quiet shift she couldn't miss. That's progress. She lowered her leg carefully, but her heart was beating faster now, a mixture of relief, confusion, and the cautious excitement of realizing her body wasn't lost to her. Try the other side, he said. She repeated the motion, hands guiding the right leg. This time the twitch didn't come, but there was a faint pull, something different from the numbness she'd known for days. I feel pressure, she said. Good, he replied. Your body's waking up in steps. Listeners might have wondered where her strength had gone exactly, whether it was broken bone, nerve damage, or deep bruising. Harlan addressed it naturally as he leaned back on his heels. You took a bad hit to the spine, he said. Not enough to break anything, but enough to stun your nerves. Happens sometimes. Takes time to get full feeling back. Taya absorbed the explanation, the clarity easing the heavy uncertainty she'd carried since the moment she fell. For the first time, she understood why she couldn't move, something no one had told her while she was with her group. What happens if it doesn't come back? She whispered. Then we adjust, he said without hesitation. But you're showing signs already. She let out a slow breath as the full weight of his confidence settled into her. Harlan rose and grabbed a small piece of dried meat from the shelf, offering it to her. Eat a little more. Your body needs fuel to work. She took it without argument, chewing slowly while watching him move around the cabin. He checked the water bucket, glanced toward the window, then began organizing the tools near the door. Hammer, small saw, coiled rope. She had wondered earlier why he kept some tools inside, rather than in the lean-to outside. Now he explained it, anticipating the question before she spoke. Animals come close at night. Lost a tool once. Don't leave anything I need out there anymore. She nodded. It made sense for a man living alone on open land. After she finished eating, he pulled the chair closer to the cot. Ready for something harder? Her throat tightened slightly. What's harder? You'll try to sit without leaning back, he said. Just using your arms and what's left in your core. Taya braced herself, gripping the crate. She lifted, her muscles trembling immediately. Sweat gathered at her hairline from the effort, and her arms shook sharply. Harlan stayed close, hands ready to catch her if she tipped. She held the posture for 2 seconds, then collapsed back into the blanket support, breathing hard. That was good, he said, voice low but sincere. Better than most folks could do after what you've been through. She stared at her hands, surprised by the strength she managed to summon. Something in her chest tightened. Not fear, not sadness, but a flicker of determination she hadn't felt in days. Can I try again? Once more, he said. Then you rest. She lifted herself a second time. This time she held the posture longer, teeth clenched as her arms strained. Harlan's hand hovered near her waist, not touching but close enough that she felt supported. When she finally sank back, Her arms trembled violently, but she didn't look defeated. She looked alive. "You did it," he said. She leaned against the blankets, breathing unevenly. "It feels different, like something is waking up." "That's exactly what's happening," he said. For a moment, they were both silent. The only sounds were the stove crackling and the wind brushing against the cabin walls. The quiet wasn't empty. It held something new, a connection formed from shared effort and the slow rebuilding of broken pieces. She looked at him, her voice almost a whisper. "I thought I'd die out there." He sat on the stool near her cot, elbows resting on his knees. "I know. You didn't have to stop." "Yes, I did," he said, meeting her gaze. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just truth. Taya felt the weight of it settle deep inside her, steadying something she thought would stay broken forever. The day continued quietly after that, but the ground between them had shifted. Harlan didn't just see a wounded woman he rescued. He saw someone fighting her way back. And Taya didn't just see the man who saved her. She saw someone who had chosen to stay, not out of duty, but conviction. As the stove cracked again, filling the room with a warm glow, she realized that this cabin, once a stranger's shelter, had become the only place she felt safe since the moment her legs went numb in the dust. The afternoon settled slowly across the cabin, leaving a softer light inside as Taya rested after her second round of exercises. Her arm still trembled slightly, but the tremor wasn't fear. This time it came from effort she was proud of, effort that showed her body was not done fighting. Harlan watched her breathing steady, and only when he was sure she wasn't dizzy did he step away to check the stove. He opened the iron door and nudged the logs, letting the flames catch deeper. The warmth spread evenly through the room, and Taya noticed a detail she hadn't understood earlier. The stove wasn't just comfort. It was survival. With her unable to move freely, she depended on the heat staying steady. If the fire went out during the night, she could freeze before she had the strength to wake Harlan. Harlan shut the stove door and turned back to her. "You feeling lightheaded?" "No," she said, voice clearer this time. "Just tired." He nodded, then brought a small wooden box from the corner. Inside were strips of clean cloth, a needle, a small knife, and 2 rolled leather bands. She frowned in confusion as he placed the box on the table. "What are those for?" "Support," he answered. "If this keeps going the way it's going, you'll need help holding your legs in place when you start trying to move them on your own." The comment caught her off guard. "You really think I'll get that far?" "I wouldn't be planning if I didn't," he said, not missing a beat. His confidence didn't come with smiles or soft tones. It was built from observation, from hours watching how she responded to pain and effort. And somehow, that seriousness steadied her far more than encouragement ever could. She shifted again, her back aching from being upright so long. A thought tugged at her, one she hadn't dared ask before. "How long do you think I'll stay here?" Harlan paused, not expecting the question. He wiped his hands on a cloth before answering. "As long as you need to." She looked away, her eyes drifting toward the window where the prairie stretched in a long, quiet line. "My group won't come back for me." "I know," he replied. She turned back toward him. "What if someone else stumbles on this cabin? What if someone sees your horse and follows the tracks?" Listeners might have wondered the same, whether the cabin was truly safe, whether Harlan had enemies from his past, whether the isolation he claimed was real or wishful thinking. Harlan addressed the unspoken concerns without hesitation. "Tracks fade fast out here," he said. "Winds sees to that. And folks who know this land stay close to streams or canyons. Nobody wanders this flat for no reason. And if they do," he rested a hand on the chair near the table, "then they meet me first." The certainty in his tone settled her nerves more than any guarantee. After a moment, he brought over the leather bands and set them on the crate beside her. Each piece was worn but well kept, and she realized he wasn't improvising. These were things he had used before. "You've helped injured people?" she asked. "Besides your brother?" He sat on the stool and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "A few drifters passed through years back. One had a broken ankle. Another got thrown from his horse. I wasn't trying to run a place for the wounded, but trouble finds remote land." "Did they stay long?" "No," he said. They left once they healed. She processed that in silence. And me, you're not ready to talk about leaving, he said plainly. So I'm not asking. She felt heat gather behind her ribs. Not embarrassment, but something like relief at not being pushed toward a decision she wasn't able to think about yet. Can you hand me that cup? He asked. She reached for it, using the crate as support. Her fingers closed around the handle, and she extended her arm toward him without shaking. It was the smoothest movement she had made since arriving. Good, he said, taking the cup. Every bit of control matters. They exchanged a look, brief but full of meaning neither tried to define. Harlan moved toward the door. I'm checking the yard for a minute. You sit tight. Taya stiffened slightly. You're leaving me alone? Not far, he said. Just outside. Want to look at something in the fence line. Her body tensed anyway. He noticed it immediately. Nobody's out there, he reassured. You'll hear my steps the whole time. He opened the door and stepped out, leaving it cracked so she could hear him. His boots thudded across the porch, then onto the packed dirt. She listened intently, tracking each movement. The wind picked up faintly, brushing against the cabin, but she knew now which sounds meant wind and which meant something else. Outside, Harlan examined the fence posts, making sure none leaned too much. He also checked the ground for tracks besides his own, information listeners would expect him to consider, especially with Taya unable to escape danger on her own. Seeing nothing concerning, he rubbed his hand along the top rail, then returned inside. You all right? He asked as he shut the door. She nodded. I was waiting for your steps. I told you you'd hear them, he said, placing his coat on the hook. She wanted to say more, wanted to admit that for a moment she felt fear return the way it had on the cart, but the words stayed unspoken. Harlan didn't push. Instead, he went to the stove, grabbed a small bowl of warm water, and returned to her side. We're going to try something different, he said. Just tell me if it's too much. She nodded, bracing herself. He dipped the cloth into the warm water and pressed it gently against the back of her left leg. Tell me what you feel. It's warm, she said. He moved the cloth upward, inch by inch. And now, still warm, she whispered. When he reached a point near her knee, her breath caught. There, she said quickly. Stronger. I feel it clearly now. Harlan rested the cloth in his hand, eyes studying the exact point where sensation improved. That means the nerve is responding all the way down. That's a good sign. She let out a shaky breath, not crying, not overwhelmed, just stunned by the relief of knowing that her body wasn't shutting down permanently. Harlan leaned back slightly, his voice low but certain. You're getting better, bit by bit. Taya nodded slowly, absorbing the truth of it. For the first time since she collapsed in the dirt days earlier, she could picture a future where she wasn't helpless. Not walking yet, not whole, but moving, living without being a burden. And Harlan Creed, standing quietly beside her, had become the one person she trusted to see her through every step of that path. The light outside dimmed toward late afternoon, casting longer shadows inside the cabin. Taya sat propped upright against the blankets, still feeling the lingering warmth on her leg where Harlan had pressed the cloth earlier. Her heartbeat had steadied now, and the shock of sensing something so clear in her leg slowly shifted into determination. She didn't want to waste the momentum. She wanted to see how far that small awakening could go. Harlan noticed the quiet intensity in her eyes. He pulled the stool closer and sat down, elbows resting lightly on his knees as he studied her posture. She hadn't asked for rest again, which already told him how badly she wanted progress. You're pushing yourself hard today, he said. His voice wasn't critical, only observational, the way a man spoke when he needed someone to know he was paying attention. I don't want to stop, she replied. You shouldn't stop, he said, but you shouldn't rush either. Rushing leads to setbacks. She absorbed his words with a slow inhale. The truth in them was unmistakable. Still, she wanted to try something more, something new. Can I try to stand? The question was quiet, but it landed heavy. Harlan straightened with a sudden seriousness he hadn't shown before. Not fully, he said, but we can test whether your legs can take any weight. Only what your arms don't carry. She nodded. Her pulse quickened. Harlan stood and cleared space beside the cot, moving the stool and crate aside. Then he brought the crate back, not for sitting this time, but to give her something strong to grip with both hands. "I'll keep my hands close," he said. "You won't fall." Taya's breathing tightened as she braced herself. She slid her hands onto the crate, gripping the edges with every bit of strength she had left in her fingers. "Lean forward," he instructed. "Slow. Let your body tell you where it's safe." She leaned, her arms trembling immediately. The strain pulled through her shoulders and upper back, but she didn't waver. Harlan stepped behind her, one hand hovering near her spine, the other ready to support her hips if needed. "Now push," he said, "just enough to lift yourself a little." She did exactly that. Her elbows bent, her arms locked, and her upper body rose several inches from the cot. Her core tightened with effort she didn't know she still possessed. Her legs twitched beneath her, weak, unsteady twitches, but each one real. "I feel pressure," she whispered. "Where?" "Both sides. Low. Like something is trying to respond." Harlan watched her carefully. "Hold one more second." She held it, her arms shaking violently, before lowering herself with a short exhale. She sat back, chest rising and falling rapidly from the effort. She expected pain or disappointment. Instead, she felt a sharp swelling of pride. "I did more than before," she said. "Yes." His voice was dead serious. This was no light praise. "Your nerves are returning, and you're gaining control." Something else caught his attention. Her fingers were less tense when they left the crate. That alone told him she wasn't losing strength. She was gaining it. Harlan reached for the cloth bag of herbs again, removing a second set of leaves. "I'm giving you the stronger mixture tonight. It'll help after all this work." She studied the leaves with new curiosity. "How do you know which ones to mix?" He hesitated, not because he didn't want to answer, but because the memory behind it was not one he revisited often. "A woman near Quartz Hill taught me years ago," he said. "She treated ranch hands when they got hurt, worked with whatever the land had, told me what to keep on hand in case I ever needed it." Taya wondered why he had remembered the specifics, why he'd kept the herbs all this time. But she didn't ask. She sensed there was history there, something tied to his brother, to old wounds that shaped how he lived now. While the mixture steeped in warm water, Harlan walked to the window and looked out across the empty yard. The wind had shifted directions. The brush moved differently. He studied it with the heightened awareness of someone who understood this land too well. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just checking the weather. Wind's picking up. Could mean colder nights." Listeners might have wondered earlier how the coming cold would affect her recovery. Harlan addressed it without being prompted. "We'll keep the fire strong tonight," he said. "Cold slows healing. And you can't afford that now." He turned back to her with the cup. "Drink slowly." She sipped the mixture, her nose wrinkling at the bitterness. He gave a faint smirk. Not humor exactly, but recognition of a taste he knew was unpleasant. "It helps," he said. She nodded and pushed through it. As the warmth traveled through her stomach, her body relaxed just enough to take another breath without strain. Harlan sat on the stool again, closer this time. "There's something I need to explain." She tensed slightly. "What is it?" "When you start trying to use your legs more, you might feel sharp jolts. They're not dangerous, but they can scare you if you don't expect them." "What kind of jolts?" "Nerve reactivation," he said. "Feels like lightning. Doesn't last long, but it'll come." She absorbed the warning. It explained something she had felt earlier, a brief stabbing sensation she didn't mention out of uncertainty. "What do I do when it happens?" she asked. "Hold on to something steady," he said, "and breathe." His tone carried no softness, but it held confidence. She trusted it immediately. He stood and placed another blanket at the foot of her cot. "You try more tomorrow. Today you did enough." Taya let her head fall back against the support, exhaustion pulling at her limbs, but her mind remained clear. A thought pressed quietly in her chest, one she hadn't spoken and wasn't ready to share. For the first time since her injury, she believed she might not spend the rest of her life on the ground. For the first time, she believed she could regain what she lost. And she knew exactly why she believed it. Harlan Creed was sitting at the table, back straight, boots planted firmly, eyes scanning the room not out of boredom, but out of the instinct to protect what was inside it. She wasn't alone anymore. And tomorrow, for the first time in weeks, she would wake with something she hadn't felt since before the injury. An expectation of progress. The next morning arrived colder than the others, carrying a stiff breeze that pushed against the cabin walls and slid through the thin cracks in the wood. Taya woke before Harlan realized she was stirring, her eyelids opening slowly as she tested the tightness in her back. The ache was there, but it was different, less empty, more alive. She shifted her hands against the blanket, expecting the familiar numbness to settle her legs in place. But instead, she felt a faint buzzing deep inside them. It startled her enough that she inhaled sharply. Harlan, seated near the stove, stirring a pot of water, glanced over immediately. "You all right?" "I felt something," she said. Her voice caught slightly from sleep, like my legs remembered they exist. He stood, wiping his hands on a cloth as he stepped to her side, his serious expression softened by the faintest margin. "Good sign." Nerves wake up strange. She rubbed her thigh lightly, surprised again when the touch didn't feel distant. "Is this normal?" "It is for someone healing," he replied. "Means we move a step forward today." Listeners might have wondered how Taya's nights went, whether pain woke her, whether she struggled with nightmares from being abandoned. Harlan addressed this unknowingly as he adjusted her blanket. "You slept steady last night. No signs of distress." "How do you know?" she asked. "I listened," he said simply. She looked at him with quiet curiosity. "You stayed awake?" "Most of it," he admitted. "Didn't want the fire dying out or your breathing changing without me noticing." His words held no grand gesture, no attempt at comfort. They were just truth. And truth weighed more than kindness. She didn't know what to say, so she let silence settle. Harlan lifted the crate to reposition it beside her. "We're trying something new. Not standing yet, but closer." She straightened slightly. "What do you want me to do?" "Shift your weight from one side to the other," he said. "Slow, controlled, like you're teaching your body where center is again." Taya braced her hands on the crate, inhaled deeply, and leaned to her right. Her back tightened, her shoulders shook, but she held the movement steady. Then she leaned left, slower this time, feeling the strange pull along her hips. "This feels strange," she muttered. "It should," he said. "You haven't held yourself upright without help in days." She continued the motion a few more times until sweat formed along her hairline. Her muscles trembled from the unusual strain. Harlan placed a steadying hand on the side of the crate. "Rest." She eased back, chest rising and falling from the exertion. "What did you do before all this?" she asked after a moment. "Before you found me?" Harlan sat on the stool, looking at the floor briefly as if deciding how much to reveal. "Fixed fences, rode the North Line, checked on the spring, ate alone, slept alone, spoke to nobody for days at a time." "That doesn't sound like much of a life," she said softly. "It wasn't good or bad," he said. "It was what I knew. And now I'm adjusting," he answered. It was the closest he'd come to admitting anything emotional since she arrived, and she understood the weight of it. A gust of wind struck the cabin again, harsher than before. The boards creaked, and Taya flinched instinctively. Harlan glanced toward the door. "That's not trouble," he said. "Just the kind of wind that comes before colder weather." An unspoken concern came to her. What would happen to her if she needed warmth constantly? If the stove failed? Or if firewood dwindled? Harlan answered her worry without her speaking it aloud. "I've got enough wood for weeks stacked behind the cabin. And if weather turns worse, I have more cut near the shed. You won't freeze here." She nodded, the reassurance grounding her. He shifted his stool nearer to her. "Now we try something harder." "Nerves again?" she asked. "No, balance." He moved behind her, placing both his hands near her shoulders, but not touching unless needed. "You're going to push yourself upright again. But this time, once you're up, I want you to try lifting your chest higher. Doesn't have to be far." She braced herself, fingers gripping the crate tightly. She lifted, slowly, fighting the wobble in her arms, rising higher than yesterday. When she was upright, Harlan stepped in closer. "Now hold," he instructed. She did. Every muscle in her arm screamed, but she held. "Higher," he murmured. "If you can." She leaned forward more, pushing her chest an inch higher, her core shaking so hard she felt her ribs vibrate. But she did it. Her arms finally gave out, and she dropped back against the blankets with a sharp breath. But she didn't collapse in frustration this time. She collapsed in accomplishment. "I didn't think I could do that," she said, trying not to let her voice shake. "You earned it," Harlan replied. That was real strength. As she steadied her breathing, he took the moment to address something listeners might have wondered since the beginning: how much danger remained from her tribe, and whether anyone had followed her trail. "I scanned the yard this morning before you woke," he said. "Check the ground east and northeast. No tracks except mine and the horse. Nothing new since yesterday." "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "This land talks," he said. "You just have to know how to read it. Nobody's been close." She nodded, absorbing the certainty in his voice. He added another log to the fire. "You'll start trying to stand soon. Not today, but soon." Her eyes widened with a mix of anticipation and fear. "You really think so?" "I've been watching every reaction," he said. "Your body's waking up faster than I expected." Taya let the truth settle deep inside her. It felt strange. Hope wasn't something she trusted easily. She glanced at Harlan again, studying the quiet firmness in his expression, the way he moved with purpose around the room, the way he planned her recovery as if it was something he had already committed himself to fully. "Why are you helping me this much?" she asked softly. He didn't look away. "Because someone should have helped you long before I found you." Her throat tightened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words formed. The wind pressed hard against the walls again, but this time Taya didn't tense. She felt grounded, anchored by his presence, by the fire, by the slow awakening of her body. For the first time since she was abandoned, she allowed herself to imagine a life past the cot, standing, walking, maybe even stepping outside into the cold morning air with her own strength holding her up. The future no longer looked like empty terrain. It looked like something she could walk toward. And Harlan Creed stood at the center of that future, steady in ways she never expected to encounter again. The morning arrived quieter than the last, the wind finally settling after a long night of rattling the walls. The sky outside carried a pale gray tone, hinting at colder days ahead, but the stillness inside the cabin was warm and steady. Taya opened her eyes slowly, feeling a tension deep in her back. Not the old numbness, but a live ache that told her nerves were responding again after yesterday's strain. Before she moved, she listened for Harlan. His boots thudded softly near the stove, followed by the scrape of metal as he adjusted the fire. She could tell from the rhythm that he had been awake a while, preparing the cabin for another cold stretch. "You up?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "Yes," she said softly. "I think so." He stepped closer, carrying a small bowl of warm water with fresh herbs steeped in it. "Drink this. Today I'll take more out of you." She lifted the bowl carefully, surprised by the steadiness in her hands after everything she'd put her muscles through. She sipped the liquid, letting the warmth spread through her throat, then tracked him with her eyes as he moved to the shelf near the table, retrieving something new: 2 wooden braces he had carved from spare lumber. She frowned slightly. "What are those for?" "Support," he answered. "For when you stand." The words sent a sudden rush of nerves through her body. "You think I'm ready for that?" "You won't know until you try," he said. "But everything your body did yesterday says you're close." He wasn't reckless. He never pushed her into anything before she was ready. But his voice held certainty she wasn't used to hearing from anyone. Taya braced her hands on the crate as he approached. Her breathing grew shallow, not from fear alone, but from the overwhelming truth that she was standing on the edge of a moment she wasn't sure she would ever reach again. "I'll be here," he said. Every second, believing him came easily. Harlan placed the braces beside the cot, then helped her shift into a forward-leaning position. She felt the strain immediately pull through her arms and back, but she held herself upright with controlled breaths. "Good," he murmured. "Now, put your feet flat." She slid her heels down, feeling the pressure of the floorboards beneath them, solid grounding real. Her heart thudded louder as sensation spread slowly up her calves. Hold the crate, he instructed. Lean into it first. She tightened her grip, her fingers whitening from effort. Push your weight down through your arms, he said. Your legs only take what they can. She pressed down hard, lifting her torso slowly. Her elbows shook violently, and a sharp jolt shot through her right thigh. She gasped in surprise, wincing. Pain? He asked quickly. No, she whispered. Not pain. It woke up. He moved closer, ready to catch her if she faltered. Then keep going. Taya inhaled and pressed harder. Her hips lifted. Her chest rose. Her knees trembled, weak but responsive. And then she felt weight shift downward into her legs. Not much. Not enough to hold her entirely, but enough that she wasn't suspended by her arms alone. Her breath caught as tears gathered in her eyes. Not from desperation now, but from the shock of feeling something she believed she had lost forever. I'm standing, she whispered. Harlan steadied her hips with both hands, ensuring she didn't collapse. You are. The room felt impossibly still. The wind outside, the crackle of the stove, the quiet breath of the cabin all faded under the raw truth of the moment. She held herself upright for several seconds before her arms buckled. Harlan caught her instantly, lowering her gently back onto the blankets. She was shaking, but her eyes were bright, alive in a way he hadn't seen before. I stood, she said again, almost breathless. You did, he confirmed, and you'll do it again. She leaned back, trying to calm her racing heart. I didn't think this was possible. Not after how they left me. Harlan sat beside her on the stool, leaning forward slightly. They gave up on you. That doesn't mean they were right. She stared at him for a long moment, overwhelmed by something deeper than gratitude, something steadier, heavier, more meaningful. Harlan, she said quietly. He looked at her, waiting. What happens now? If I get better, if I walk again, what then? Listeners might have wondered the same. Would he send her back? Would he expect her to leave? Would she have to find her group again? Harlan's answer came without hesitation. You decide what happens. Nobody chooses for you anymore. She swallowed hard. And if I don't want to leave, his jaw tightened, not in discomfort, but in the restrained control he always carried. Then you stay. A deep silence settled between them, filled with something fragile and new. Taya exhaled slowly, letting the truth anchor her. I don't want to go back to them. I don't want that life. I want. Her words faltered, but the meaning carried through. Harlan met her gaze steadily. You don't owe the world anything. You owe yourself safety. If staying here gives you that, then this is where you stay. She blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek before she wiped it quickly. Are you sure? I am. Her chest tightened, not from pain, but from a quiet realization that this man, who spoke rarely and lived simply, had given her more strength in days than others had given her in years. Harlan, she whispered again, voice unsteady. I want this place to be home. It already is, he said. The final question listeners might wonder pushed its way out of her. And you? Do you want me here? He answered without looking away, his voice firm with the honesty he lived by. I do. The last of her fear dissolved at those words. He helped her lie back comfortably, adjusting the blankets so she wouldn't strain her muscles after the effort. She watched him move with quiet care, realizing that this wasn't pity or obligation. It was choice. As the stove crackled and the prairie wind finally calmed, Taya rested her hand near his on the cot. Her fingers brushed his lightly, hesitant, searching. Harlan didn't pull away. He turned his hand, letting his fingers close gently around hers. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was simple, solid, true. For the first time since he found her on that broken handcart, they both felt the certainty of what they were building. Not survival by accident, but a life chosen by both. The cabin felt warmer that night. The future felt clear. And the story of Taya and Harlan Creed reached the ending it had been moving toward from the moment he lifted her from the dust. A quiet, steady beginning to the life they would share together.